In this video, I'm going to talk about what you're more likely to remember and why you might forget something. So if you have, say, like a list of things to remember, there's 3 definitions connected to what you're likely to remember. So for example, if on the first day of class I had made you all go around and say your names, whose name are you most likely to remember? Chances are it's the very first person that said their name, and it is the person right before you, the last person to say their name. That is because of the serial position effect. So the serial position effect says that the beginning and end of a list are easier to remember than what's in the middle. Same thing with like your grocery list too. Beginning and the end, so much easier. Now, when it's specifically the beginning of the list that's easiest, that's called the primacy effect. And this also explains things like first impressions, because if you meet someone, the very first impression you have sticks the best. Primacy effect is responsible for that, and we'll talk about that more in chapter 12. If it's the end of the list, the most recent stuff, that's the recency effect. So the end of the list is easier than what precedes it. So serial position effect, beginning and end are the easiest when it's specifically the beginning. Primacy effect when it's specifically the end. Recency effect. Now, one factor in memory is the fact that your brain physically changes when you create a memory. It doesn't matter if it's a short-term memory or a long-term, there is a physical change at that neural level. The neurons are changing with a memory. That is called memory trace. So memory trace is the physical change, again, that's with the neurons, when a memory is formed. So this can also play a part in you not being able to remember. If we're talking about short-term memory and not having the ability to remember, it could be because of decay. So decay is when you lose a memory because the memory trace isn't used, so you lose it. It sort of is like a trail in the woods. If it's not kept up, it's going to be destroyed. Or since it's short-term memory, a better example is if you are bushwhacking through the woods. So there is no trail. As you go through, you're creating the very, very beginnings of a trail, but if you're the only one that ever takes that path, it's very quickly going to fill in, the trail's going to be gone. That's decay. Now, for a long-term memory, you can also have a version of decay, but when we talk about long-term memory, what we call that is disuse. So disuse is decay for long-term memories. So if you don't use a memory, eventually it will decay. So for example, the stuff you're learning in this class, if you never take another psychology class, there's a good chance that 20 years from now you're not going to remember it all. If you haven't kept up on it, you haven't used it, it's going to eventually decay. So decay, short-term memory. The name for decay for long-term memories, disuse. Both of those are because the physical trail to the memory basically disappears because it's not kept up. The final thing connected to what you're going to remember and why it's hard to remember something potentially is the interference theory. And this theory says that you can't get a long-term memory because other information is blocking it. And there are 2 reasons for this depending on what is hard to find. If it is a proactive interference, what that means is that older information prevents you from getting newer information. So for example, if you drive stick shift and then all of a sudden you hop into a new car that is an automatic, and you just naturally go to reach for the stick that is in your older car. That would be proactive. Your older information, where the stick shift was in your old car, is preventing you from correctly driving the new one. So that would be implicit retrieval that is being affected. If it is newer information that is blocking the use of or the retrieval of older information, that's retroactive. So retroactive interference is when newer info prevents retrieval of older information. So for example, my friend is learning Spanish and knows French as well. And so if he decides to go back and speak French again, his learning of Spanish is affecting his ability to remember words in French, because this new knowledge, the new way of saying things in Spanish, is affecting that retrieval of that already stored, that older information of the French. So this is also going to affect what you can remember. So memory traces, the physical change in your brain and the decay of it affects your ability to remember. Interference, it is either older information or newer information that is preventing retrieval of it. And what you remember in the first place, the end is the easiest, the beginning is the easiest, beginning and end are always easier than the middle.